If I had nickels for every highly acclaimed video game released in 2023 centered around fishing, I'd have 2 nickels.
Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
Dredge and Dave the Diver are both very well received games, but both take the core mechanic of fishing in completely different directions. Starting with the one of the two that I played first, Dredge is a fishing game swimming in Lovecraftian horror. The game has you controlling this small boat as you travel around the waters of a collection of islands, fishing up, well, fish, but also other things that aren't fish, including materials and parts that can be used for upgrades. Though a simple gameplay loop, it is executed masterfully and it's pretty engaging, far more than you normally expect. Part of this is because of how well the game develops its atmosphere. When you first begin the game, everything seems relatively normal, despite the odd vibes you get from the people in town. Soon though, as you explore more, you start fishing up these strange mutated versions of the fish that you're used to, and it becomes very clear that something is going on here. Combine this with the engaging gameplay loop that has you managing your upgrades and your inventory, exploring around the island and completing quests, and you have a great game that rightfully received a lot of praise upon release. Now, the game isn't particularly difficult, but I don't think that's really the point of the game. It's far from the kind of game that tests your skills and challenges you to master the mechanics. The game instead heavily relies on its vibes to keep you engaged, and it does a good job of that. Doing things like staying up too long through the day-night cycle and getting close to horrors increases your panic level, which can cause hallucinations and spawn various things to attack you as well as other effects. These can be dangerous. Thankfully though, managing your panic level is pretty easy in this game. Just spend some time resting in a dock and you'll be fine. The story setup has the player sailing to the coastal town of Greater Marrow, situated on a distant archipelago, to take up a job offer to be the town's local angler. Naturally though, we get into a shipwreck on the way and wake up on the dock of that coastal town, greeted by the mayor who graciously replaces our boat, for a loan of course, and presses us into service almost immediately. As I mentioned, the vibes of basically every character you meet are a bit off, giving you this nagging feeling that things aren't quite right. As you progress through the game, the cast of characters that you talk to become awfully cryptic in their dialogue, obviously not telling you the full story, as you kind of have to start piecing things together yourself, which I think is a real strength of the game's storytelling. As you progress the story though, you end up coming across the Collector, a man who is seeking certain treasures and oddities across the game world. These tasks essentially make up the main questline for the game from this point forward, and as you collect these relics and deliver them, you'll unlock a series of eldritch powers, which can do things like banish enemies or teleport directly to the dock in front of the collector's house. These abilities are on a cooldown and they also increase your panic level, so a lot of them are often best used sparingly. You'll likely start to figure out what is happening here as you complete these quests, and this will culminate in one of 2 possible endings. One ending, the bad one, is the default ending, but there is an alternative good ending available by talking to a specific NPC on a particular island, which will change some of the final events of the game. It's pretty easy to get either ending, and they place a save right before the final step of the game, meaning you can easily reload and experience the other ending, which I think is a really good decision. This game oozes with fear of the unknown. Pairing that with the unknown quality of the deep ocean itself and the eldritch horror that this game aims to evoke works really well, I think. I will note that the game is a little front-loaded, at least in the sense that the first few hours of the game there's a lot of things happening, but by the end of the game, things are pretty easy since you have all the upgrades, etc., and you're just going through the motions at this point. Because of that, pacing just seems a bit odd, and it's a nitpick to be sure, but something worth pointing out. Besides those eldritch abilities I mentioned, you can also complete research and upgrade your equipment. So some of the equipment is just unlockable from the shipwright outright, just purchasable by you. But some of them require you to collect research parts, either by completing quests or fishing them up, which you can then spend on equipment upgrades such as fishing rods or new engines, improving your fishing capabilities. In addition to these upgrades however, there are also these shrine-like puzzles that if you complete them you get specific exotic variants of fishing equipment, though for the most part they're kinda bad if I'm being honest, and there's better alternatives from the shipwright. So these are really mostly there for completionists who want to engage with as much of the game as they can. You might also come across some books that as you read through they can unlock some perks which can passively improve your fishing or your ship's performance. You begin as a meager, not very capable boat, but over the course of the game you upgrade it to be a much more capable ship with more cargo space and lots of equipment installed for all different types of fishing. You go from taking a whole day to travel pretty much anywhere to being able to cross the entire map in only a few in-game hours, dramatically increasing how productive you can be. You begin in the center of the map in a place called the Marrows, and as you progress the story you explore 4 different biomes surrounding the Marrows, each with their own different types of fish that you can catch. Each fishing node has a type associated with it, and you will need equipment of the corresponding type in order to catch fish from there. This is important because as you go to different areas, you're going to run into people, usually situated at one of the docks, and they will need your help, which will typically consist of catching specific fish. There are some ways in which they spice up gameplay, such as using explosives to open up new areas, or luring monsters into traps, as well as other things, but the majority of the game does boil down to catching fish, as you would expect. All of this fishing and gathering resources feeds into a fantastic gameplay loop, however, when you throw in the day-night cycle. Daytime is pretty unremarkable, as it's the standard gameplay I've talked about up to this point, but nighttime is when things start to happen, like your panic level rising, which makes you more likely to be attacked. These nighttime dangers can simply be avoided though by resting at a dock, where you can pass time until morning. There is a fear of the darker, lower visibility night, and there are a couple of things that genuinely spooked me during my playthrough, though generally the danger is only present if you want it to be. Altogether, it does a great job of producing this eerie atmosphere which the game does beautifully. Now for the main part of the game, the fishing. All of this gathering resources or collecting fish is done typically by fishing or by dredging. You do this by completing these little mini games. There's a few different ones depending on the types of fish that you will catch, and you'll simply play a little timing game in order to reel stuff in. In addition to the fish, it's also possible to dredge up trinkets and materials. You can find valuables to sell or materials that you can use to upgrade your ship. A lot of these things sound boring individually, but when you put it together, it makes for an incredibly addictive gameplay experience. At the start of each day, you've probably given yourself a pretty clear goal. It might be traveling to a specific biome to progress the story, catching a specific fish, which might need you to check your encyclopedia to find out how to find them, or if you even have the right equipment to get it. You spent all this time upgrading your ship and pursuing different objectives, all the while completing some form of progression for the game. You're doing all of this while trying to avoid nighttime and your rising panic level atop the backdrop of this dreary coastal environment. Overall, a fantastic experience with maybe one or two minor gripes that might bother you depending on how long you spend with the game. In my opinion, it's well worth playing. While Dredge immerses you in eerie isolation, Dave the Diver offers a more lively, whimsical experience. Dave the Diver is a game that stretches the definition of an indie title to its limit. In fact, it's not an indie game at all. It was developed by Mint Rocket, which is wholly owned by Nexon, a very large company. Despite this, it managed to be nominated for the Best Independent Game at the Game Awards in 2023, and we know how they never make any questionable decisions about their nominations. Looking at you, Game of the Year nominated Shadow of the Erdtree. This game takes the kitchen sink approach to game design, for better or for worse. What I mean by that is the game never stays on one thing for too long. At first, the game has two phases, diving and running a restaurant. Diving lets you catch fish, which you will then sell at your sushi restaurant, and making more money at your sushi restaurant allows you to buy upgrades for your fishing. A solid symbiotic relationship between the two game modes that allows for an honestly pretty fun gameplay loop. It's not long though before the game suddenly becomes a dancing minigame, a boat chase game, a farm sim, a Tamagotchi, and a Pokemon card game, and that's just scratching the surface. I can't help but be impressed at their dedication to constantly introduce new gameplay styles. It always keeps you guessing at what they're going to do next. All of these things they introduce though unfortunately lack the depth you'd hope for. Pun very much intended. And outside of the oh wow moment of being introduced, there isn't much substance to these games. It's an interesting approach when developing this game, and I'm in two minds about it. I'm unsure if it adds to the experience or detracts from it, as perhaps that time could have been spent fleshing out and building upon the key loop of that restaurant and fishing, expanding these to be more engaging and interesting than they currently are. When I say that though, I don't mean to imply that either the restaurant or fishing game modes are bad, but I do think both of them could be refined just a bit further to really make them stand out. Thankfully, the gameplay loop really is satisfying and addictive, always providing the player with some reward or goal to keep them going just a little bit longer. Just one more dive, one more shift at the restaurant, then I'll turn it off, I swear. Initially, it is a bit like Dredge, sans the Lovecraftian horror themes, in that you collect fish as your main goal. It differs though in that you don't sell the fish as they are, but instead use them in your restaurant to create dishes, and these give you money, which then allows you to purchase upgrades, which allows you to collect more fish, which you sell at the restaurant to collect more money, which gets you more upgrades, and so on and so forth. A lot of what you can spend your money on though doesn't necessarily make the game more fun, but instead makes you more efficient. Upgrades allow Dave to dive deeper and explore new areas, opening up the possibility for more fish. However, the restaurant remains largely static for much of the game, with restaurant upgrades instead going towards making the restaurant more autonomous. By playing the game then rewards you with less game that you need to play. As the diving lasts longer and longer and the restaurant shifts become fewer and farther between, not to mention quest-related events that have you skipping nights at the restaurant, it can be a long time before you engage with that side of the game again. Add into this the fish nursery, which while useful, further automates your workflow, leaving you with less and less things to meaningfully engage with. Even other things introduced like the farm can then be automated. It gets to the point you don't really have much to do but to finish the main quest and have the game be over and done with. Tangent. but let me tell you, as a victim of Daffy Duck's foul play on Game Boy Color, this final boss gave me PTSD. If you too were a victim of Daffy Duck, you may also be eligible for compensation. Please call the number on your screen now. I will point out though that the pixel art and animation in this game is breathtaking. For me, this is the main reward you get for progressing the game. I would just sit in awe at the animations, which were beautiful, but also usually really funny as well. It's clear that a lot of passion went into making this game, and that passion shines brightest in the visuals and animations. Ultimately, Dave the Diver feels like a stitched together collection of mobile games, and there's nothing inherently wrong with mobile games. I'm not going to pretend that I'm above them. I have no problem admitting that I've spent frankly too much time on Fire Emblem Heroes and Pokemon TCG Pocket, but Dave the Diver also inherits the worst thing I find about mobile games, a lack of lasting satisfaction. It does a great job of shooting dopamine into your brain constantly for long enough to keep you in its hold until the end, but after the credits have rolled and you experience the come down, you realize it didn't leave a lasting, satisfying feeling in you. Rather, it's like the junk food of video games. It makes you feel good in the moment, but then makes you feel worse later. It's worth diving into, but don't expect it to leave a lasting mark, which is a shame as you can clearly see the love and the passion that went into this game, but I think it fails to rise above the sum of its parts. Both Dredge and Dave the Diver take the idea of fishing as a core mechanic and spin it in vastly different directions, offering unique experiences. Where Dredge is steeped in mystery and unease, immersing players in a world of creeping dread and ominous waters, Dave the Diver is an explosion of colour, whimsy and variety, constantly shifting gears to keep the player entertained. But the comparison also highlights the strengths and the weaknesses of each. Dredge, with its focused gameplay and atmospheric storytelling, creates a tightly knit experience that's engaging from start to finish, even if the latter stages lose some of their initial tension. In contrast, Dave the Diver's sprawling array of mechanics and minigames provide a buffet of content, though some players might find this approach leaves certain elements undercooked. Thanks for watching. I've been writing a bunch of scripts lately, so keep an eye out for more videos coming soon. I have a bit of a backlog of games that I have finished but haven't turned into content, so I'm trying to catch up on those, hoping to be up to date with what the backlog actually looks like by early next year. Remember to like and subscribe, and I hope I see you in the next video.